Ready to record, Melissa?
Yep, I just started it. It should start here in a moment. There you go. Now it's starting. Yep.
Great. Okay, we are recording. Good afternoon now. It is Thursday, January 14th. This is a special meeting of the Vermont Climate Council. The primary purpose of today's meeting is to review the Climate Council's report to the legislature, which is due tomorrow on January 15. Statute requires the council to report on its activities and progress towards meeting the greenhouse gas reduction requirements in the Global Warming Solutions Act by January 15 of 2021, and then I think annually thereafter. So we have provided the council with a draft report, and the agenda includes a walkthrough of the report and a discussion of the report, and then followed up with some organizational updates from Secretary Moore, with some public comment at the end, adjourning at 1 o'clock. And I appreciate everybody taking their lunch hour to do this work. This is one of what I heard yesterday from a senator, hundreds of reports that have been required of the administration this year, and doesn't make it any less important, but it's, you know, we do a lot of reporting in this time of year, and so everything seems to always fall on the 15th. So Secretary Moore, if there's any discussion around the agenda, please, members, raise your hand or let us know if any concerns with the agenda. Seeing and hearing none. Do you want to? I don't know if someone's talking or if that's an echo.
I think it may have been an echo.
Okay, great. Well, why don't you go ahead and do a run through of the report then, Secretary Moore?
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen just so that we're all staying on the same page in terms of where I'm at in the report. But overall, I think Secretary Young's description of the report as sort of a high-level overview of the work of the council to date sets the stage very nicely. I have endeavored to share my screen. Can somebody let me know when you're able to see it?
We can see it. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I would say one of the pieces of the report has been an attempt to link back to all of the materials that have been presented to the council with the hope that this could make it useful to the legislature should they wish to avail themselves. So the report begins with just a brief introduction of what the core elements of the Global Warming Solutions Act are, identifies the Climate Council's roles and responsibilities, and includes a link to the membership that's posted on the Agency of Administration website, along with the biographies each of you shared during our first meeting. Identifies the steps that we need to take in order to develop the climate action plan and the additional considerations also laid out in statute, and then turns its attention to the activities of the council to date, listing the 4 meetings that we've had with links, as I indicated, back to the presentation so that folks can review them at their leisure. We tried to remain fairly high level in summarizing the content of each of the meetings, but welcome suggestions and feedback as to whether or not you feel like this level of detail hits the mark. Noting the special meeting of the council convened today to provide comment on the report, and then presumably where we may want to spend the most time discussing is the identifying what we see as next steps, including that we've established the 4th meeting of the month for our regularly scheduled meetings, that the agenda for the 25th includes a panel discussion with folks from other neighboring jurisdictions that have recently undertaken similar climate action planning work. as well as that we've contracted with the Consensus Building Institute to facilitate that meeting and help with the work needed to develop a charter and actually charge the subcommittees with a specific scope that will ultimately feed back into the climate action plan. And then similar updates to what have been shared at each of the council meetings in terms of where we stand with recruitment, the request for information that was released earlier this week, and we can update that in the final version of the report to include a link. And I will actually post the link in the chat once I'm done talking here. And then the ongoing effort to develop an RFP for facilitator services to provide support to the council and the subcommittees through delivery of the action plan in December. And so with that, Secretary Young, I'm happy to I'll stop sharing my screen, but I think we could open it up for questions, comments, feedback.
Well, maybe we could do section by section, starting unless, okay, Liz, you have your hand raised, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for putting this together. I had 2 specific suggested edits that I would be happy to put right in chat, but I'll read for council members' consideration. One would be ahead of the individual meeting description, just add a sentence that says public comments, both oral and written, were taken at each meeting so that we specifically acknowledge that. And I would suggest that in the next steps paragraph, a sentence be added to what we expect on the 25th that would say, council members also expect to discuss ways for the expertise of the various members and their organizations to be drawn upon council or subcommittee meetings going forward. I can put those in chat, and if the amendments are acceptable, that would allow you to use them.
Great.
Okay, so maybe we could just then go back to the introduction section and just see where folks are on that, and if there's any comment, feedback, corrections, edits on the introduction.
I'm in.
Who's that? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. This is Millicent Cooley. I'm on the Brattleboro Energy Committee.
Okay.
I'll mute myself. Sorry.
No, that's okay. All right, Melissa, you can just sweep through. I don't see any hands raised from council members or people raising their hands.
I don't know.
Okay, moving, the next section of the report was December 21, 2020, which was the first meeting. The description of the meeting and the link to the presentations. Is there any feedback on that section? All right. All right. Seeing and hearing none, the next section was January 4, 2021 meeting. Description of the speakers and the links to their presentations. Again, open it up for feedback, comments, edits. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to page 4 of 4. I think, did I skip a meeting? No. So the last page, this is going fast. The last page is again next steps, and that's page 4 of 4. So Sue Minter.
Hi, thank you for this report. I just wonder if I think that when I looked at the agenda for the 25th, we are going to talk about getting into the constituting the subcommittees, and I think that'll really be great because I think we'll be able to have more substantive discussion and also build upon the expertise of some of the members here, kind of relating to Liz's comment. But could we add something? And I don't have something written to suggest, but something that really outlines those subcommittees and their as a next step and our planning to constitute them and have them meet.
Absolutely. I think that makes sense and is consistent with in many ways the reflecting back to the Global Warming Solutions Act we've done in all the other pieces, and we'll add that information.
Yeah, Sue, are you looking, just for clarification, like the list of all the subcommittees, which we have in a PowerPoint that we could easily link to or add to the report?
Sue, you're on mute.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that they should be mentioned early on if they're not already. Sorry, I thought they
Okay,
maybe had been. And then at the end on next steps, that next steps are to constitute those committees.
Yep.
Lauren?
Thank you. Not an edit, just a request of Secretary Moore. I might have missed this since our past meetings, but just curious on that first bullet for next steps, if you could provide a bit more visibility on the 3 staff positions. I know we've talked kind of at each of the meetings about that project manager and wanting to hire them first, but it looks like it's already underway, and I'm just curious what you're expecting for those other 2 and what the timeline is for hiring.
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that, and I think that the suggestion of information that would probably serve us well to add to the report. The act, or the budget that came with the act that's embedded in the agency's budget included funding for 3 positions. So the project manager position, what we're calling is, or a project technician position, so a staff level position to really support the administrative and some of the research needs of the council, and then a legal position, a lawyer that is largely envisioned to support the when we transition from drafting the action plan into the rulemaking portion of the work. So those first 2 are intended to provide direct support to the council. The 3rd position will be more providing support to the agency in its efforts to implement the action plan.
Thank you. And timing on those hires?
So I saw a final version of the hiring, I'm sorry, let me back up. The project manager position, we've made an offer to an individual. I expect to hear back by the end of the week. So that one, hopefully they'll be able to join us at our meeting on the 25th and be in place full time then or shortly thereafter. The project technician position, the paperwork is with our Department of Human Resources. The position didn't actually exist in our classification system, so we have to create it. And that's what the paperwork is. That's with the Department of Human Resources at this point. As soon as that clears, then we will go to recruitment. The legal position, we are anticipating to be several months behind. These first 2 in part because those services aren't required as early on. And to the extent there is need for legal services in the interim, we intend to use existing lawyers within the Agency of Natural Resources and essentially have them charged to the Global Warming Solutions Act account until we're in a position of actually needing a full-time legal resource. It seemed like the most responsible way to use our budget. So project manager by the end of this month. My hope would be by mid-March, the project technician would be online, and then the legal resources later this spring in all likelihood.
Okay, thank you. Congrats on the project manager. That's exciting news.
Yes, very much so.
A lot of talent out there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've kind of gone through all 4 pages of the report. I can just open up generally. Is any more discussion around that? Catherine, your hand is raised, sorry.
No problem, I just barely raised it. I'm wondering if in the next steps it's worth adding something reflecting our need to develop some sort of public involvement, public communication plan and outreach effort.
So I guess I would offer that I think some of that will be taken up in the scope of work of the subcommittees. In particular, the Just Transitions Committee charge includes some of that public participation and engagement. The other elements of the act that speak specifically to public participation and engagement are sort of much further down the line with a prescribed period set aside once the draft plan is complete. But I can take a look at that and see. I guess so. It's a two-part answer. I think in part we can address it by including the subcommittees as per the prior suggestion in a description of their intended work, and then I can look and see if there's an opportunity to speak more directly to public participation as well.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Chad.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Just a quick question. Will the timing of our work allow, and might it be possible for the council to provide specific recommendations for action during the current legislative session, even if it's perhaps late February or March timeframe? And if so, would we mention that here as part of our next steps?
So I guess I wouldn't say that by my read, and I'm happy to hear feedback from others, but that my read, that's actually part of what we're charged with. I think that timing could be really challenging, in that the directive to come back with feedback to the legislature on initiatives, as well as to my agency on rulemaking, really flows out of a complete action plan. And I guess I would personally have some concerns about a piecemeal approach. There's probably also nothing in the act that precludes that, but I would offer I don't see it as what's envisioned in the way the directive was laid out in statute.
Okay, thank you.
Any other council members on the report and what to include? Or Melissa, Richard?
Yeah, just a quick comment on that last back and forth. I think it's an excellent question, and frankly, I think there may be things that the council would want to speak on this year instead of waiting until the report for a comprehensive report at the end of the year. But I don't think it's necessary to make that decision in this report right now. If something comes up that we decide, listen, we know when we get to the end, we're going to want to recommend something. I see no reason there's nothing in the statute that would tell us not to speak out on that.
Right.
But
Yes.
we don't need to say that right now. We don't have those issues are in front of us.
I think that's consistent with Secretary Moore's, view. It's not precluded. Melissa, are there any other council members with hands raised?
Johanna Miller just raised her hand.
Oh, great. Hi,
Thanks.
Johanna.
Hello. Thank you for putting this together, and I appreciate the good input also offered by fellow council members. I guess my question, sort of pivoting off of the conversation we were just having about weighing in on the legislative process, that more relates to, as you deliver this report and to the legislature, my experience has been that maybe someone would be asked to come in and talk about the council and overview that. I guess my interest is, in terms of if the legislators, as their prerogative, ask you questions that they're interested in, like how we answer those questions that may get in front of council decision making, or that may not reflect the full view of the council. So I recognize this is like an imperfect process, and that January 15th, 2021, you've delivered a great report, but I'm just curious about how that would be navigated.
Well, that's a good question. I guess it's going to, I don't know, if the legislature is going to take up this particular report. I don't know if the legislature is going to take up other issues. We've not put anything forward to them as an administration. And I I don't know if Secretary Moore has any additional views on that, but typically the invitation would probably come to me, and I would typically call the chair and say, are there particular issues that you want to address today? And I could certainly keep the council informed that we've received an invitation and when the meeting is scheduled and what the topics are. And then I would assume if we feel we need to meet before there's testimony, that would be great. But I would have no intention of getting out in front of the council and speaking for the council on specific initiatives that are not coming from the council. Secretary Moore, you may have a different view.
No, I think you covered it, Secretary Young. I was just going to offer that generally my experience with the legislature is they extend an invitation to a specific individual. And so I could envision that they would be likely to reach out to Secretary Young as chair, but may reach out to other members as well. And to the extent we can flag for you if such an invitation is received, there's always an opportunity for other council members to reach out and offer their availability to participate as well.
Okay, Melissa, if you could confirm for me that we've heard from all council members whose hands are raised. I don't want to miss anybody.
We have heard from council members. Thank you.
So with the addition of member Minter's and member Miller's suggestions, which I heard echoed by others, what have I missed? There's the indication that we've taken public comment. There's adding the section on the subcommittees and additional information on next steps and where we are with the hiring and process and timing on that. Those are the three things that I've heard and noted, but doesn't mean I caught everything. With those additions, go ahead.
The other suggestion was about a statement about plans for public participation,
which we could add and say that will be part of the subcommittee, the subcommittee's work.
Yes.
So with that general outline of additions, are there any further suggestions? A couple hands went up. Secretary Tebbetts.
Secretary Young, if it's appropriate, I move the report with the amendments for consideration.
Thank you, Secretary Tebbetts. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we can open it up for discussion. We have the report with the 4 items that we've discussed, and I think there's consensus on including in the report before it's filed, but we can open up for further discussion on the motion to approve. Are there any council members who wish to be heard or have discussion on the motion? Melissa, make sure I have not missed anybody, please.
I do not see any other hands raised that are members of the council.
All right, well, we can call the question then. All in favor of the report as modified and discussed, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Thank you. We'll make those changes, pretty it up a little bit for the legislature, and it will be filed electronically tomorrow. I believe by midnight is our deadline. It's the 15th. Okay, we have the next is the organizational updates and needs. I think Secretary Moore maybe has ticked off the update on the project manager already, but there are a couple of other items about if she's not, she may have touched on most of the items in the January 25 meeting, but I'll open it up to you, Julie, to clean that up if you feel we haven't addressed certain things.
I would only want to flag for council members that I provided your contact information to the Consensus Building Institute and expect that one of the representatives from that organization will endeavor to reach out to each of you next week to conduct what would likely be kind of a 30-minute informational interview, and in particular is interested in feedback on the process to date, but also if there are particular subcommittees you are interested in participating on. I've asked them to gather that information to hopefully help prime the discussion and ensure that we've got sort of a reasonable distribution of interest by council members in serving on each of the committees. One of the things that I've discussed with them in developing sort of the plan for the meeting on the 25th is that I can see need for a fifth subcommittee, whether it's called a science and data subcommittee or a data and technicals work subcommittee. They've reflected back that that's something that existed in Maine in particular and had an important role kind of engaging on the modeling and scenario building work that will be necessary to test different emissions reductions profiles. I'm sure they will share that with you, but just put that out there to inform your thinking that there are the 4 committees established in statute. There will be a proposal to add this 5th one. There's also an opportunity to add additional committees, further additional committees. And if you have thoughts on that, I encourage you to share them with CBI as well, so that they can consolidate all of your thoughts and recommendations and bring them to the meeting on the 25th.
Any questions of Secretary Moore from council members on that piece?
Sue Minter has her hand raised, please.
Hi, Sue.
Thanks. And I do really want to thank everyone who helped, and I assume it's primarily Secretary Moore's group for putting this together and all of the work to date to get us all informed of sort of where we, as quickly as we can. And I'm trying to understand a little bit more about CBI and what they're doing with us and for us. And then how do we want to try to constitute the subcommittees? And I guess one fundamental question I have is, does a subcommittee extend beyond members of the council? In other words, members of the public or other experts from the public? And I think that behooves us. But if we do, then how do we even designate those people? And under what sort of authority or directive do we do that? And is that something that CBI is maybe going to help us understand? Certainly we'll hear reflections from the other states who I guess have gone through this. Thanks.
Yeah, those are all excellent questions, Sue. CBI's, I guess the sort of the overarching description I would offer of the contract we have with them is to assist with process design, right? So to figure out how to get us from where we sit today, broken into subcommittees, with each subcommittee having at least a preliminary sense for what their body of work is intended to be and the timeline it needs to be accomplished on. We do have the opportunity to add additional membership to the subcommittees. I think CBI is probably going to come in with some recommendations about size and of subcommittees based on experience they've had facilitating processes in other states. But certainly this is a great opportunity to sort of expand the knowledge base of the council and draw from other experts in Vermont and bring them into the fold. So if you have thoughts about specific individuals, organizations, or interests that aren't currently well represented in the council membership and would be an important voice to have be part of the subcommittee conversation, I encourage you to think about those and make notes for CBI as well. We're going to do a similar effort looking within state government to make sure we've identified the relative experts and also recognizing that it'll be important to have staff participate in each of those subcommittees and provide that capacity and support that would come with their participation. So there is a lot of work to sort of get to those inaugural meetings of the subcommittees. And really, my hope is that CPI will help move us through that process in a thoughtful way, and then provide some documentation of the decisions that are made coming out the other end that we can refer to moving forward.
I just want to appreciate that good thought on processes, and also hope for your sake, all of you, as the legislature opens and your time is going to be directed, that they will be able to provide that support for us to proceed without so much of your time and energy. But thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Member, sorry.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Just gonna say, Member Cohart has his hand raised.
Great.
Yeah, just a question for the secretary. Can you tell us the names of the project team leader at CBI?
So yes, there are three, two of which I can name off the top of my head. Actually, I can name all three. So the gentleman that's going to actually facilitate our meeting on the 25th is David Plum. He is the individual who facilitated much of the Maine Climate Council's work. It is unclear to me that he will be personally reaching out to each of you next week, just due to the limited number of hours in the day. The two other individuals that are helping staff this particular effort are Pat Field, and he may be a familiar name and face to some, in that he was the point person on the Payment for Ecosystem Services working group that the Agency of Agriculture had led last year. And then a woman named Catherine Morris, who's been very involved in the New York State climate action planning work. Just maybe one follow-on point to clarify something that Sue's final comment made me think of, which is the contract we have with CBI right now is really only for the meeting on the 25th. We're in the process of drafting a bigger RFP, recognizing that facilitator services will be important and integral to the work of the council and the subcommittees through the production of the action plan. But that will be a competitive bid process, as opposed to this small contract was able to be let as a sole source effort.
Thank you.
Johanna has her hand raised.
Thank you. Thank you for that update, Secretary Moore. Sounds like some good work has been happening with everything else on your plates. I also just related to what Sue, and I hesitate to ask this now, but as we think about standing up the subcommittees and the composition of them and bringing other important voices to the table, I put this out here now just because it's not written in the statute, and it as we're making investments and commitments, I'm really interested in making sure that people who want to participate, who don't have the ability or the privilege to do this professionally, like I do, I know there's per diems written in the statute for council members. I certainly would love to waive mine, and to the degree that others are able, in no judgment, but just like wanting to make it possible for others to participate. And I don't know what that looks like yet in terms of that full picture, in terms of financially and otherwise. We heard, I think, some really good advice from Susanna on like night meetings and other things. So I'm just thinking about that, and I'm putting it out there just for others to think about too, and as we consider how to stand these up and make sure that the different voices and expertise that we have in this state to get this done is really embedded in the subcommittee, the working group structure.
I think we all agree with you on that, Johanna, and I will certainly share with the consultant or the facilitator that is got to be an important part of the conversation, right, and the structure.
Suzanne, I don't know if you are in a position to answer this, but would we need additional authority from the legislature in order to be able to offer per diems beyond the individuals specifically currently identified in the Act?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes, I believe we would. I'm assuming the language in the statute is limited to council members, so we would have to have spending authority to go beyond council members. That's a good point.
Okay.
Sue has her hand raised.
Okay, Sue?
Quick question, since we are issuing a report to the legislature and we just encountered something that might need some clarification, might we want to mention that in the report? If we intend or wish to somehow support financially participation by, marginalized populations at a minimum, I don't know. It might be a way to communicate that need or that wish.
I don't know what the process is at this point since we approved the report, Suzanne. Oh, you're on mute.
We could entertain a motion to reopen the motion to approve, and if we can by consensus agree that we should have another vote with that particular suggestion added. I take a motion to do that.
I'd move that for discussion.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on reopening our approval of the report to include Sue Minter's suggestion that we note for the legislature some additional resources or authority to facilitate the involvement of others outside the council member in meetings? We're going to have to figure out a way to structure that. And that's maybe something for the facilitator, but at least get on the table for the legislature that they can expect to see something like that from us. Go ahead.
This is Chris Campy. The only thing I would suggest is perhaps in a letter of transmittal, if you're going to do such for the report, maybe note that in a letter of transmittal too, just so it doesn't get lost totally, because that's something that they're going to have to deliberate upon.
We typically don't do a letter of transmittal with the report. Yeah, it's the legislature wants the report electronically, and I think this will be a report that's freestanding, Chris, because of the process they have set up for a collection of reports. Any other council members on the discussion around adding this to the report?
There's 3 more members with their hands raised. We'll start with Catherine Dominitrick, please.
Oh, sorry, I should have put my hand down because this whole activity was exactly why I raised my hand in the first place to suggest it. So I'm all in favor and we'll be voting aye.
Thank you. Richard Cohart, please.
I didn't know my hand was up, but I do have a comment. I think it's a great suggestion, but I realize, and probably everybody does, that we would have to have a process for deciding on membership of subcommittees, particularly if we're adding non-council members to subcommittees. This just triggers a procedural question that we're going to have to face. What's the decision-making process for deciding who's a member of the public who happened to come to a meeting on the one hand versus who's a member of the public who's not a member of the council who is invited to participate as an ongoing member of a subcommittee? There's a big distinction between those things. Perhaps I'm stating the obvious, but
yeah.
We've decided that we're going to take on this challenge, so we're going to need to do that.
Well, yeah, I think we've decided to raise it as an issue that we may need more legislative authority, but we don't know what we're asking for yet. But it is an issue in terms of promoting, robust involvement. And I think it's a good question for the facilitator and how other states, have stood up. I think they've done this in their subcommittees, but I'm not an expert on that. We'll hear from them on the 25th. Probably have a good discussion around that.
Johanna is the final member that has her hand raised, please.
So actually sort of building off that point, but I mentioned I was hesitant to raise it because I feel like this is a question that kind of gets, as Richard just noted, sort of out front of the sort of process conversation that I'm looking forward to having and we're talking about on the 25th. But I also don't know if it requires a legislative fix, and I know the legislature has a lot on their plate. So I guess I kind of want to leave that to be an open question, because I'm looking forward to hearing how other states have done it. Part of my understanding is that other states, they've found other ways to bring dollars to the table to enable really important public participation and, like just creating the research and other, sort of work necessary to do this work well. So to me, it's an open question whether that comes from the general fund in this moment or some other. So I guess I would want to, while I raised it, I noted I'm hesitant because I'm not an attorney. So the per diem thing, I just want to explore how to make this happen. And I don't know whether that's requires legislative tinkering or there's some other way.
I think it's an issue that's been identified that I'm hearing some consensus around just at least flagging for the legislature without a lot of detail. And I do know that other states like Maine, they've had fundraising or, foundations that have contributed to the work to make it happen, and not suggesting that's where we'll go. But I think I hear that's what you're saying is let's not make a specific ask right now, but flag it as an issue that we'll be discussing in the coming meetings. Does that work for you, Johanna? Okay. Does that work for everybody else?
Abby just raised her hand as well, please.
I like the idea of keeping it as a broader ask, because I think that this is something that the legislature needs to be contemplating on a broad scale anyway, in terms of how they're thinking about per diems for councils and work in the future, because I think this is a bit of a perennial issue in terms of how you ensure that equitable participation is possible, and how you bring expertise to the table. So I hope that this is maybe a good nudge for them to contemplate these issues on a broader scale anyway.
Okay. Thank you for that, Abby.
There are no further council members with their hands raised.
A bit of a redo on the report that we approve the report with a statement of an issue that we've identified that we will be exploring with the facilitator and as a council around enhanced participation of public members of subcommittees or expertise that we would want to bring to the table. Something along those lines we'll include as a notation in the report. So if there's no other discussion, is there I'll take a vote on the motion to amend the report to that effect. Take a vote. Sorry, we have a motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, well, thank you for that. So Julia, going back to the agenda, update on the management for the, I think you're on update on the project manager, which I think you've already given, but go ahead if you want to add more and move on to the last.
As I say, I'm hopeful by the end of the week, someone will have, the individual that's been offered the job will have accepted our offer, and we'll be looking at establishing a timeline to onboard them. But as you indicated, Secretary Young, we had more than 30 applications for this position, many of them extremely highly qualified. It was a very competitive field, and frankly are grateful for the interest in it.
Yeah.
And then I guess I could just, there's an RFI that's been posted on the Vermont Business Registry website. I put the link in the chat, as well as it's included in the agenda. And this is really looking at the technical services, the modeling work that will be required to support evaluating the different emissions control scenario or emissions reduction scenarios and their ability to achieve the different requirements established in the Global Warming Solutions Act. To the extent you have within your networks people who or organizations that might be well suited to respond to this RFI, I would appreciate anything you can do to raise the profile and attention of it. Responses are due February 6th. We are anticipating a fairly quick turnaround in terms of the taking in that information and then issuing an RFP, knowing that there's a weeks-long process in order to get that will be required to get a contractor in place to actually perform the work. But think that this is an important interim step to make sure we've sort of thought through what is actually going to be required, both in terms of the scope of services and the resources.
Oops. Thank you. I'm trying to go from chat to unmute and I hit hand raise. Sorry. I love this world. With that said, any council members have questions for Secretary Moore generally on the organizational update and needs section?
Johanna has her hand raised.
I'm sorry, asking so many questions, but I guess, and you don't have to answer it now, but I would just be curious, just in general, as new job opportunities come up and or public engagement opportunities come up, just knowing a little bit more about how the state already distributes its, how you already distribute that information, so that I'm happy to help share it. But if my other, like in a conversation yesterday with the Transportation Research Center at UVM, I mean, there's so many great partners. I would love to help push that information out, but I don't want to be redundant. So if there's any sort of protocol or whatever that you already do, I just would be helpful to know that.
Yeah, so people can subscribe to the business registry and receive pings from it when there are new opportunities posted in areas that they've indicated as being of interest. Largely that is a tool used, I think, by consultants and contractors, recognizing that there are probably NGOs and other academic organizations that may be both interested in and able to be responsive to the RFI. In particular, would encourage outreach into those spaces, because I think those types of organizations are far less likely to have sort of registered with the state and receive the information preemptively.
Great. Melissa, is that the?
I see no other hands raised from council members.
All right. So we'll move on to our public comment portion of the meeting. Melissa, I would ask if anyone signed up ahead of time to comment.
Bill Bender had sent an email and asked to comment, and he also has his hand raised. And there's one other member from the public. So you have 2 total members from the public.
Okay, well, we start with Mr. Bender.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to make a comment. My comment is about the ANR greenhouse gas emissions profile that was part of the December 21st meeting and now just got forwarded to the legislature. I was immediately after that, I was in contact with the authors of that presentation and then talked to Heidi Hales in ANR, who they referred me to, and then of December 27th, sent a fairly detailed critique. Fundamentally, the Climate Council should be concerned about flows of carbon, and that's the only thing that really matters here. If we don't change the flows of carbon, then we're not having any impact. And the way the data is presented is absolutely critical. And in that presentation, I think there's fundamental problems with the framework that's used. Electrification, there are only 2 ways to change carbon. It's electrification and efficiency. And on the electrification side, it matters completely of how we look at the electric sector. 95% of all the electricity used today in Vermont is from 20th century facilities. That's just fact. Unless you do something different, that emissions profile is not going to change. So in that framework, there was data presented, the change, it was between 2016 and 2018 for the amount of carbon emissions. There's just absolutely no way it happened in reality, because it would have had to take a third of all the cars in Vermont and thrown them into Lake Champlain for those 2 years. So it clearly didn't happen. There's clearly a problem with the way we think about carbon emissions in that framework. I'm really concerned that that framework is now getting presented to the legislature as something that's accepted. Something needs to change there, or we're not actually going to affect carbon. And that's the bottom line. We have to affect carbon emissions. If we can't measure it properly, we can't make proper policy. I think there's a flaw there that needs to be addressed. I think this is really important. And I actually do have both professional and academic experience on exactly these kind of topics. I have a PhD in economics. You worry about flows of goods and commodities and services. Carbon is a commodity, just like oil or gas. And you worry about the financial transactions that affect how that flows. And RECs are a financial transaction that affect how that flows. So I have professional experience with both of those things, and professional experience with producing data sets for international organizations. So I actually have something to contribute here. And I've had no response from ANR since the December 27th email laying out these concerns. So I really think it's quite important that these issues get addressed. Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Bender, very much. Melissa, we have 2 more hands up.
That is correct. We'll go with Catherine Lowther, please.
Thank you. I'm wondering if it'd be possible to add a subcommittee on climate change education. I've been teaching courses on climate change at Goddard College, and I'm currently working with a group of high school teachers on developing climate change education in Vermont high schools. And I've also just recently joined a group at Shelburne Farms that is working on climate change education. And I think it would be a very good place to have this as part of the Climate Council. So I'm wondering if that's a possibility.
Thank you. Again, as you've heard during the meeting, we will be talking about additional subcommittees in a facilitated meeting on the 25th, and that is a suggestion that's worthy of consideration. So thank you.
And the final public comments from Matt Cota, please.
Hi, my name is Matt Cota with the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association. Just want to say that I agree with Secretary Moore and others about hearing from our neighbors on their climate action plans as Vermont, as we all formulate our own. As most of you know, we sell 600 million gallons of liquid fossil fuels here in Vermont on an annual basis, and the fuel that we sell flows primarily from 3 places: the Port of Albany in New York, Springfield, Massachusetts, and Montreal, Quebec. All 3 are developing similar low carbon fuel standards and/or emission reduction goals or mandates. Finally, while heating oil only represents 15%, that's 15, not 50, of the liquid fossil fuel sold in Vermont, it does have a plausible pathway to be part of the emission reduction strategy for Vermont's climate action plan. And I'd be happy to assist the committee in a presentation that describes how this is feasible and how the Vermonters who are currently keeping us all warm might be part of our energy future. And I stand with my friend Joanna Miller and would happy to do that for free and not accept any per diem. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, very much.
There are no other hands raised for public comment.
Okay, great. With that, that's the conclusion of the agenda, and it's 12:55 p.m. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Aye. Is there anyone opposed? Well, thank you for taking your lunch hour and getting this important piece of business done. I will have Melissa copy everybody on the final report when it's out the door electronically. So thank you again for all your input, and have a rest of the nice rest of the day is a good one, and sunshine somewhere. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very
Thank
much.
you.
Bye-bye.